She had $11 in her bank account, an eviction notice tucked in her purse, and zero idea that the 3 boys throwing pancakes at her head would change her life forever. 22 nannies had walked through that iron gate before her. 22 women with degrees, references, and impeccable resumes, and every single one of them lasted less than 48 hours. But Claire Beaumont wasn't like any of them. She was desperate. And sometimes, desperate is exactly the kind of fearless that a broken household needs to find its way back home. The Craigslist ad looked wrong from the first word. Claire Beaumont read it 3 times sitting at the corner table of a Dunkin' Donuts on Maple Street in Hartford, Connecticut, nursing a small coffee she'd paid for in quarters. Her daughter, 7-year-old Rosie, was at school. Rent was due in 4 days. The number in Claire's bank account, $11.43, glowed on her phone screen like a small, mocking sun. The ad read, "Immediate hire, live-in nanny position, compensation, $6,000 month, housing and meals included. Candidate must be resilient, no fragile personalities. Serious inquiries only. Contact H. Brandt, SQ, $6,000 a month. Live-in housing." Claire looked around the Dunkin' Donuts. A woman in a fur coat walked in and ordered a large caramel latte without glancing at the price. Claire looked back at her phone. $6,000 was more than she'd made in the last 3 months combined, after the restaurant she'd waitressed at for 6 years, DiMaggio's Grill on Farmington Avenue, shut down without warning, leaving 42 employees without jobs or severance. She'd applied to 14 positions since then. Retail, delivery, childcare centers, 2 interviews, 0 callbacks. She typed out a message to the lawyer's email before she could talk herself out of it. Henry Brandt's office called her back in under an hour, which startled her so badly she nearly dropped her phone into her coffee. The woman on the phone had a clipped, professional voice and said the interview would take place the following morning. She texted Claire an address in Glastonbury, the wealthy suburb 15 miles east of Hartford, where old Connecticut money had been quietly compounding for generations. The address she sent was for the Ricci estate. Claire didn't know that name yet. She would. She borrowed her neighbor Patty's 2009 Honda Civic, dropped Rosie at school the next morning, and drove east on Route 2 until the subdivisions gave way to stone walls, iron fences, and long private driveways cutting through stands of old oak and maple. The Ricci property sat at the end of a half-mile driveway behind a gate that looked like it belonged in front of a European embassy. 2 men in dark coats stood at the gatehouse. One of them checked a clipboard before letting her through without a word. The house itself was a stone manor, 3 stories, 12 bedrooms by her later count, with a chef's kitchen, a wine cellar, a home theatre, a gym, and a backyard that rolled into 2 private acres of landscaped garden. It should have felt welcoming. It felt like a warning. Henry Brandt met her in the front parlour, a compact man in his 60s, with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the careful neutrality of someone paid to deliver bad news gracefully. He reviewed her application, asked her 3 questions about childcare experience, and then sat back and said something she didn't expect. "Miss Beaumont, I'm going to be transparent with you, because I believe it's more efficient than deception. 22 candidates have been hired for this position since January. Not one of them completed their 2nd day. The children are challenging. Mr. Ricci is a private man with specific expectations. The household runs on strict schedules and tighter security. Before you meet anyone, I need to know, is there anything in your life that would make you run?" Claire thought about $11.43. "No," she said. Henry studied her. "Very well." He led her upstairs. She heard them before she saw them. There was a crash from behind a door at the end of the hallway, followed by laughter, bright and chaotic and completely unrepentant. Henry Brandt sighed through his nose. He pushed open the door. The room was enormous, a combined playroom and bedroom suite that had clearly once been beautiful. Now it looked like the aftermath of a very specific kind of war, one waged by small people with unlimited energy and absolutely no consequences. A beanbag chair had been dismembered. Lego structures had been built with architectural ambition and then apparently destroyed with equal enthusiasm. Someone had drawn an elaborate city map directly onto a section of white wall in marker. 3 boys stood in the center of it. They were 8 years old. They were identical in every meaningful way. Dark hair, dark eyes that tilted slightly at the corners, square jaws that were already developing the suggestion of their father's bone structure. They wore the same white shirts, now in varying states of disaster. One had a split in the knee of his khakis, another had paint on his collar. The third, Leo, she would learn, always identifiable by the small scar above his left eyebrow from a bicycle incident, was holding what appeared to be a water balloon indoors. "This is Leo, Ash, and Nico Ritchie," Henry said. "Boys, this is Miss Beaumont." Leo threw the water balloon immediately. Claire caught it. She didn't think about it. It was pure reflex, the muscle memory of 6 years bringing food through a packed dining room at DiMaggio's Grill while navigating narrow aisles and sudden pivots. Her hand shot up. The balloon smacked her palm, and she held it there, intact, water sloshing inside. The room went silent. All 3 boys stared at her. Claire set the balloon carefully on the floor. She looked at the city map on the wall. "Is that Hartford?" she asked. A pause. Then Nico, the quietest of the 3, the one who observed before he acted, said, "It's a fake city. We made it up." "What's it called?" "Asheville," Ash said immediately, pleased with himself. "Terrible name," Leo said. "I second that," Claire said. Ash turned to her with sudden, aggressive suspicion. "You're not supposed to agree with them." "I'm not supposed to lie either," Claire said. Henry Brandt made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. He excused himself and left Claire alone with 3 8-year-olds who had destroyed the careers of 22 professional childcare workers. She looked around the room. She looked at the boys. She thought about Rosie at school right now, sitting in Mrs. Paulson's 2nd grade class with her second-hand backpack and her peanut butter sandwich and her complete, beautiful trust that her mother was going to figure something out. "Okay," Claire said. "What happened to the last nanny?" Another silence. Then Leo grinned. The wild, slightly dangerous grin she would come to know as the one that meant he was deciding whether to trust someone. "She cried," he said, "like a lot. The one before that locked herself in the bathroom," Ash added helpfully. "For how long?" 6 hours, Nico said quietly. "We felt bad about that one." "Which one didn't you feel bad about?" "Miss Hargrove," Leo said immediately. All 3 of them agreed on this, nodding with the solemn unity they reserved for matters of group consensus. "What did she do?" "She took Nico's sketchbook," Ash said. "She said drawing wasn't productive." Claire looked at Nico. He was the quietest she'd already catalogued. He hadn't smiled yet. "Do you want to show me what you draw?" she asked. He considered her for a long moment. Then he went to a dresser, pulled open the bottom drawer, and brought out a battered composition notebook with a rubber band around it. He handed it to her without comment. She opened it carefully. Inside were detailed architectural drawings, buildings, bridges, cross-sections of fictional skyscrapers annotated in a cramped, precise hand. The level of spatial reasoning was extraordinary for an 8-year-old. She turned pages slowly, saying nothing. When she reached the last page, she closed the book and handed it back. "You should be an architect," she said. Nico took his book back. He sat on the floor cross-legged. "Okay," he said, which she would learn was his version of high praise. She had survived the first 15 minutes. The second challenge arrived at exactly 6:47 p.m. She heard the front door open from upstairs. She heard the quality of the silence that followed, the way the whole house seemed to pull itself together, draw a breath, and stand straighter. Leo, who had been in the middle of a story about why their last nanny was afraid of geese, there was apparently an incident, stopped talking mid-sentence. Dante Ricci had come home. He was not what she expected. She expected cold. She expected the performance of power, the deliberate slowness, the heavy rings, the fur-collared coat that Mafia bosses wore in movies. She'd done exactly zero research before coming here, but the drive, the gatehouse, the two men in dark coats, and Henry Brandt's careful vocabulary had assembled a picture in her head. Dante Ricci walked into the kitchen where she was heating soup for the boys, and he was tired. Not weak. Not soft. Tired in the way that certain men get tired when they have been carrying something enormous for a long time and have refused to put it down. He was tall, 6'2", maybe more, with dark hair gone slightly silver at the temples, though he couldn't have been older than 38. His suit was charcoal and expensive, and worn with the casualness of a man who had never needed to think about what he put on. His eyes were the same dark shade as his son's, and when they landed on her, they sharpened immediately with the particular alertness of someone accustomed to evaluating threats. "You're still here," he said. "Last time I checked," Claire said. She turned back to the stove. She wasn't performing bravery. She genuinely didn't have the bandwidth for performance. She was watching the soup, a beat of silence. "The agency said you have experience." "I was a waitress for 6 years. I'm good at managing chaos, and I don't panic when things get thrown at me." She paused. "Literally." He said nothing. She heard him pour a glass of water from the pitcher on the counter. She risked a glance over her shoulder. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Mr. Brandt said you have questions about the position," she said. "The position has been filled 22 times," he said. "The question I have isn't about your qualifications." "Then what is it? Why haven't you run?" His voice was flat. It wasn't cruel. It was genuinely curious, with an edge of something she couldn't name yet. "Every woman we've brought into this house has been gone before breakfast. You've been here 8 hours. Claire turned to face him fully. "I have a daughter," she said. "She's 7. Her name is Rosie. We have 4 days before we get evicted from our apartment. I have $11. I don't have the luxury of running." He looked at her. She held his gaze. "That's honest," he said. "I don't have the bandwidth for anything else," she said, which was also honest. He set his water glass down. He looked at the soup. He looked at her. "The boys have dinner at 7, he said. "They don't eat soup." "I know," Claire said. "The soup is for me. I found leftover pasta in the fridge. I'm making them that." He almost smiled. She caught it, just the edge of it, a hairline fracture in the composure, before it was gone. He walked out of the kitchen without another word. At 7, she served the pasta. Leo ate half of his and declared it acceptable. Ash ate all of his and asked for seconds, which she took as a compliment of the highest order. Nico ate his slowly, deliberately, the way he did most things, and when he finished, he said, "Thank you," in a small, precise voice that made her chest do something unexpected. She went to bed that night in the guest room they'd assigned her, a room larger than her entire apartment, and lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Rosie, about $11, about Dante Ricci's tired eyes, and about the hairline fracture that had almost become a smile. She didn't run. In the morning, she made breakfast. She was up at 5:45. Old habit. DiMaggio's grill had opened for breakfast on weekends, and she'd worked those shifts for years. She found the kitchen well-stocked, professionally organized, and exactly as intimidating as a kitchen that had been designed by someone with money and staffed by people who knew what they were doing. She made French toast. Not fancy French toast. The kind her mother used to make. Thick bread, egg and cinnamon custard, cooked in real butter until the edges caramelized, served with powdered sugar and fresh strawberries from the bowl she found on the counter. She made enough for 5 people. At 6:30, she went upstairs and knocked on the boys' door. "Breakfast," she said. Silence. "I made French toast." More silence. Then the sound of 3 different pairs of feet hitting the floor with varying degrees of enthusiasm. They came down in their pajamas. Leo first, with sleep in his eyes and his hair disordered. Ash right behind him, already alert in that slightly over-caffeinated way he had. Nico last, wearing socks that didn't match and carrying his sketchbook as if it were a limb. They sat at the kitchen island. She put plates in front of them. The first bite from Leo produced complete stillness. The second produced a sound, a low, involuntary "oh," that she recognized from years of watching people eat food that surprised them. Ash had already cleared half his plate with the focused intensity of a small machine. Nico ate his slowly, as always, but his eyes were different this morning. Warmer, more present. "Our mum used to make this," Nico said. The kitchen went quiet in a different way. Claire kept her voice even. "Did she?" "Before she left," Ash said. His tone was deliberately casual, the practiced casualness of a child who has learned to say hard things like they don't matter. Claire had read the file Henry Brandt had given her. Isabel Ritchie, née Isabel Carver from a Boston family, had left 2 years ago. The file was brief and carefully vague about circumstances. The boys had been 6. There were no visits, no contact. The official reason on record was irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. The unofficial reason was buried somewhere Claire wasn't authorized to access. "I didn't know her," Claire said carefully. "But if she made French toast like this, she had good taste." Leo looked up from his plate. "Are you staying?" he asked. Blunt, the way 8-year-olds are when they're trying not to sound like they care. "I'm planning to," Claire said. The other ones always said that. "I know," Claire said. "I've got more reasons to stay than to go." She heard the kitchen doorway. She turned. Dante Ricci stood there in a dark shirt, tie loosened already at this hour, holding his phone in one hand and looking at his 3 sons eating French toast at 6:30 in the morning, something she suspected hadn't happened in a long time. He looked at the plate she'd set at the end of the island. "That one's yours," she said, "if you want it." He sat down. He ate. He didn't say anything, but he ate every bite. That was day 2. That was the day that everything, every careful, controlled, fortified thing that Dante Ricci had built around himself and his sons, began very slowly to develop cracks. By the end of week 2, Claire understood the shape of the household. Dante left at 7 in the morning and returned between 6 and 8 in the evening. He was never late without calling ahead. He attended every dinner he possibly could. This, she noticed, filed away, added to the portrait she was building. A man who shows up for dinner is a man who is trying. His office was on the ground floor behind a door that required a key card, and she never went near it. She never asked what he did. She didn't need Henry Brandt or Google to tell her that the Ricci name in southern Connecticut carried a particular weight, the kind that came from decades of controlled power in industries that didn't always appear on company websites. She knew, in other words. She was not naive. She also knew that the 2 men at the gatehouse changed shifts every 8 hours, that the security cameras covered every inch of the exterior and most of the ground floor, that there was a man named Vincent Moretti who showed up 3 or 4 times a week, stocky, mid-40s, with a scar on his jawline and eyes that catalogued every room he entered, and that when Vincent arrived, Dante's already controlled energy compressed into something tighter and more dangerous. She kept herself useful. She kept herself honest. She did not pry. She also called Patty and asked her to pick up Rosie from school, explain the situation, and start bringing her to the estate on weekends. Dante had authorized this through Henry Brandt without commentary. On the first Saturday, Rosie arrived with her backpack and her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hops, and stood in the driveway looking up at the house with the pure, uncomplicated awe of a 7-year-old who had no idea what complicated meant. "Mom," she said, "it's like a castle." "Don't touch anything you don't have permission to touch," Claire said. "Okay." Rosie immediately ran towards the garden. Claire turned to find Leo, Ash, and Nico standing on the front steps, watching. Nico had his sketchbook. By noon, all 4 of them were in the garden, and Nico was sketching Rosie's profile, while she narrated an elaborate story about Mr. Hops to Leo and Ash, who were listening with the riveted attention of children encountering a truly original storyteller. Dante came home early that Saturday. He stood at the kitchen window for a long moment, watching the 4 children in his garden. Claire was at the counter making sandwiches. She saw him in her peripheral vision, but didn't stop what she was doing. "She has your eyes," he said. "Rosie? Everyone says that." "Her father," he stopped. Not in the picture, Claire said evenly. Hasn't been for 4 years. Silence. Do you want a sandwich? She asked. Yes, he said, which he was learning was Dante's way of saying thank you. It was also in week 3 that she first encountered Isabel. Not the woman. Isabel Ricci had not returned to this house and showed no signs of doing so. But the ghost of her, the way the boys flinched when certain songs came on the radio, the way Nico's drawings occasionally included a woman's figure standing in doorways or at the edge of gardens with her back turned, never facing the viewer. The way Leo, during a nightmare one Thursday night, called out a name in his sleep that wasn't Claire's. She sat with him until he quieted. She didn't mention it in the morning. What she did mention, carefully to Dante, one evening when the boys were asleep, and she found him in the kitchen at 11 o'clock with a glass of whiskey, was that she thought the boys might benefit from talking to someone, a therapist, someone outside the house. She expected resistance. What she got was worse. She got the face of a man who already knew and had already failed to fix it. I've hired 3, he said. They stopped coming. Why? He turned the glass in his hands. Because they asked me questions I wasn't willing to answer. She waited. Isabel leaving wasn't. He stopped, started again. There are things about this family, Miss Beaumont, that I can't explain, and that you shouldn't ask about. I'm not asking about them, she said. I'm asking about your sons. He looked at her. In the kitchen light at 11 o'clock, the tired was more visible, layered into the lines around his eyes, settled into the set of his shoulders. He was 38 years old, and he looked like a man who had been at war for a decade and couldn't remember what the war was originally for. They like you, he said. I like them, she said, which was true, and which surprised her a little, because she had come here for the paycheck. He nodded slowly. He finished his whiskey. He got up to leave. Mr. Ricci, she said. He stopped. You should sleep. He turned and looked at her with an expression so unguarded she almost looked away. Then he was composed again. The door closed, the lock clicked, and she sat in the kitchen alone, with the feeling that she had just glimpsed something enormous and brief, like a ship appearing through fog, and then disappearing again. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday, the way serious trouble usually does. Not on a Friday when you're braced for the weekend to go sideways, not on a Monday when the whole week is already in a defensive crouch, but on an ordinary Tuesday when the sky was flat and grey, and Claire had just put a grocery order in and was thinking about whether Leo's science project needed more poster board. She had been at the estate for 31 days. Henry Brandt had informed her of this milestone with the gravity of a man announcing a geological event. 31 days, Miss Beaumont. The previous record was 44 hours. He'd said it over the phone, and she'd heard in his voice something she hadn't expected from a man whose professional neutrality was essentially structural, something close to relief. She understood then that Henry Brandt had been doing this job for a long time, and that the revolving door of this particular position had cost him something personally. He was the kind of man who kept score on the things that mattered. 31 days. She was deep enough into the routine that she'd stopped thinking of it as a routine and started thinking of it as simply life. The boys' schedule lived in her body now, their habits mapped into her instincts, the way a restaurant floor plan maps itself into a server's feet after enough years. She knew that Leo needed 5 minutes of silence in the morning before he was ready to be spoken to, that Ash would eat anything if you called it something interesting, that Nico always paused at the top of the staircase each morning and looked out the landing window at the garden before continuing down, a small, private ritual he'd never explained and she'd never asked about. She knew the house. She knew its rhythms. She also knew, in the quietly catalogued way she knew most things, that she was developing feelings for Dante Ricci that had no business existing in this context. This she handled the way she handled most inconvenient truths. She acknowledged it to herself with complete honesty, and then put it in a drawer and closed the drawer and got on with breakfast. She was a practical woman. She had been made practical by years of having no alternative. There was a line between them that was appropriate and sensible and professionally correct, and she held it the way you hold a seam in a garment, firmly, invisibly, so that nothing comes apart. Then Vincent Moretti came in the morning. He always came in the afternoon. This had been consistent across every visit in the past month. 2, sometimes 3 times a week, mid-afternoon, through the side entrance, directly to Dante's office. Claire had built this into her understanding of the household's geography, the way you build a piece of furniture into a room. It was simply where it was. It didn't move. You navigated around it without thinking. Vincent arriving at 8:40 in the morning, before the boys had left for school, before Dante had finished his second coffee. This was not where the furniture was supposed to be. He came with 2 men she had never seen. They were large in the particular way that certain men are large, not gym large, not athlete large, but constructed large, assembled for specific purposes, the kind of men whose size is inseparable from their function. They moved carefully through the entrance hall the way people move when they are always, at every moment, slightly prepared for something to go badly. Claire was in the kitchen. She heard them come in. She heard Vincent's voice, low, directed, urgent in a way it hadn't been in the afternoon visits. And she heard the sound of Dante's office door closing, with the finality of something sealed. She got the boys' lunches packed. She checked Nico's homework folder. She signed Leo's permission slip for the field trip she had somehow forgotten about, and that was due today, which was a minor crisis she managed with the focused competence of someone who manages minor crises before the major ones have finished presenting themselves. She drove the boys to school. She came back. Vincent's car was still there. She made herself a coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the garden. Gerald the Frog's enclosure, visible from here, a small wooden structure in the far corner that Leo had built with more engineering ambition than Gerald strictly required, and she told herself to mind her own business, which was advice she was generally capable of following. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. She heard the front door close. She heard 2 cars pull out of the driveway. Dante did not emerge from his office for another hour. When he did, she was in the hallway with a stack of folded laundry, and he came out of the office and stopped when he saw her, the way a person stops when they've been in a pressurized room for a long time and have stepped into open air and need a moment to recalibrate. He looked at her. "Take the boys to Patty's this weekend," he said. His voice was level and low, or somewhere they know, somewhere comfortable. She held the laundry against her chest. "What's happening?" "Nothing I want you involved in." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I have," he said. Not harshly, with the particular precision of a man who knows exactly how much information he is and is not willing to give. "Are the boys safe?" she asked. "Yes." No pause, no qualifier. The word came out with the weight of a promise, which was different from an assurance. Assurances were easy. Promises cost something. She studied his face. He let her look. "All right," she said. She went upstairs with the laundry. She called Patty that afternoon and arranged the weekend. She should have left it there. She was awake at midnight. She'd been awake since 11, lying in the dark, running the morning's events through the quiet, analytical part of her mind that never fully powered down, when she got up for a glass of water. Not because she was thirsty, because lying still while her brain worked was a kind of active discomfort, and moving through a dark house was at least a different kind. She came down the back stairs. The kitchen light was on. She heard his voice before she reached the doorway, low and controlled, the voice he used when he was containing something that wanted to be larger. She stopped in the hallway. She knew she should keep walking. Up the stairs, back to bed, back to the practical business of minding her own business. She had Rosie sleeping 3 doors down. She had a job she needed. She had a very clear understanding of what happened to people who put themselves in the middle of things that weren't theirs to be in the middle of. She stood in the hallway, and she listened. "The Castellano deal is done, Vincent. I'm not reopening it. I don't care what Gregor wants. The documentation is clean. The lawyers signed off. There is nothing to contest. No, if they come near this property, you know what to do, yes. I know what I'm risking. I know." The last 3 words landed differently than the rest. The rest had been managed, controlled, tactical, the voice of a man working a problem. Those last 3 words were not managed. They were the sound of a man telling the truth to himself out loud, with someone else on the line to hear it. She went back upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the wall and thought about what she'd heard. Gregory Castellano. The Castellano deal. If they come near this property. She turned these phrases over slowly, the way you turn something in your hands when you're trying to understand its shape in the dark. She thought about Rosie 3 doors down, asleep with Mr. Hops and the framed portrait Nico had given her, and the complete, trusting unconsciousness of a 7-year-old girl whose mother had told her this was safe. She thought about Leo and Ash and Nico across the hall, carrying their nightmares and their wild energy and their grief, which lived in them quietly like a tenant who had been there so long everyone had stopped mentioning it. She thought about Dante's voice, saying, "I know what I'm risking," with the weight of a man who has been calculating risk alone for so long that the calculation has become indistinguishable from breathing. She went back downstairs. He was still in the kitchen. The phone was on the counter. He had a glass of water, not whiskey, water, and he was standing at the window with his back to the room, looking out at the dark garden. He heard her come in. His shoulders shifted slightly, the nearly invisible recalibration of a man re-engaging his composure. But he didn't turn around immediately. "You were in the hallway," he said. "Yes." "How much did you hear?" "Enough to understand the shape of it," she said. "Not enough to know the details." He turned then. He looked at her across the kitchen, the midnight kitchen, the low light, the two of them in the particular intimacy of a house that is asleep around them, and she saw on his face the war between his instinct for control and something older and more exhausted that was tired of winning that war every single night. She pulled out a stool at the island and sat down. "Tell me," she said, "not the version for Henry Brandt, not the version for the men at the gate, the real one." "You don't want the real one," he said. Not a warning, an offering. A door he was holding open, so she could choose not to walk through it. "I'm still sitting here," she said. He looked at her for a long time. Then he pulled out the stool across from her. He sat down. He set his water glass on the counter, and he folded his hands, and he looked at them, and then he looked at her. He started talking. She didn't move for 2 hours. She asked 3 questions total, small, specific ones, the questions of someone who is listening rather than waiting to respond, and he answered them fully, which she understood was unusual, which she understood cost him something. The Ritchie family. 3 generations. Construction and commercial real estate on top, older arrangements underneath, the whole structure inherited by a 26-year-old who hadn't chosen it, and had spent 12 years trying to convert it into something clean. The enemies this made in both directions. The law enforcement attention that came with a name that had history. The Castellanos, who predated Dante's involvement, who had partnered with his father, Carlo, in arrangements that Dante had been methodically, legally unwinding, and who considered the unwinding a betrayal of the First Order. Gregory Castellano had made a threat. Through channels, through intermediaries, always through intermediaries, always with plausible distance between the words and the man who meant them. The threat was not against Dante directly. She understood what it was against before he finished the sentence. She saw it in the way his hands tightened slightly on the glass. She sat with all of it. She let the silence hold for a moment before she spoke. "What does handled look like?" she asked. "For you, in this situation, what does handled actually mean?" He studied her. "You're asking if it's legal." "I'm asking if my children are going to be safe when it's done," she said, "however it gets done." He heard the word, my children, the way it covered 4 people now, not 1, and something in his face acknowledged it without making a production of it. "They'll be safe," he said. "I need you to trust me on that." She thought about the way he'd said, "I know what I'm risking." She thought about the 40 minutes behind a sealed door. She thought about 31 days and French toast and a man who showed up for dinner every single night, even when showing up cost him something. "Okay," she said. She got up. She rinsed her glass. She looked at him across the kitchen one more time. Get some sleep, she said. Whatever's coming, you're going to need to be sharper than you are, right now. He blinked. It was the most surprised she had ever seen him. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark and listened to the house and thought about the shape of things, what she'd walked into, what she'd chosen to stay inside of, and whether those were the same decision or two different ones, made a month apart. She decided they were the same. She closed her eyes. In the morning, she got up at 5:45 and made breakfast. And when Dante came into the kitchen in his charcoal suit with his second-day exhaustion and his careful composure, she put a plate in front of him without comment. He ate every bite. That meant something. She was almost certain by now that they both knew it did. The next 5 weeks were the most complicated of Claire Beaumont's life, and she had lived through some genuinely complicated years. A pregnancy alone at 23, a partner who left without the decency of a real goodbye, 6 years of double shifts and sore feet, and smiling at tables full of people who never once wondered if she'd eaten that day. She knew complicated. She had its phone number memorized, but this was a different category entirely. She stayed. She got up every morning at 5:45 and went downstairs and made breakfast. French toast on Mondays and Fridays, scrambled eggs with the sharp cheddar Leo preferred on Tuesdays, pancakes on Wednesdays, because Ash had made a case for pancakes so thorough and so passionate it had felt almost legislative. She managed homework and school pickups and the rotating chaos of 3 8-year-old boys who expressed love primarily through property damage and argumentation. She scheduled dentist appointments and handled the Tuesday evening reading logs that Nico, alone among the 3, actually completed without negotiation. She did all of this the way she did everything, with her sleeves rolled up and her eyes open. And she told herself, in the mornings especially, that this was a job she was grateful for. A job that had 4 walls and a roof and a school district for Rosie and a paycheck that landed in her account on the 1st of the month with the reliability of a thing that has never once needed to be worried about. She told herself this was a job. She almost believed it. Rosie had stopped calling the estate the castle by the 3rd week, which was how Claire knew her daughter had settled in the way children settle, completely and without ceremony, the way water finds a level. She now referred to it simply as here, as in, when we get home here, and the garden here has a frog, Mum. I named him Gerald. Leo had confirmed the frog was real, and had, unprompted, built Gerald a small enclosure from materials he found in the groundskeeper's shed, which was either a sign of genuine kindness or an engineering experiment, or both. With Leo, it was always both. Ash taught Rosie chess. This was not a neutral act. Ash approached chess the way generals approach territory, with long-term strategy and 0 mercy. But he taught her with a patience he applied to nothing else in his life, correcting her gently, replaying positions, explaining the logic behind the pieces with the focused earnestness of a person who has finally found a subject they can share. Within 3 weeks, Rosie beat him. She did it without quite understanding how. Ash stared at the board for a full minute, and then said, "Okay, we're going again," which was the most respectful thing Claire had ever heard him say. Nico drew Rosie's portrait for the 3rd time in early October. This one he framed himself, using a frame he found in the storage room, and repainted gold with supplies he acquired, through means that remained unclear. He presented it to Rosie without explanation or ceremony, simply knocking on her door and handing it to her. And Rosie held it with the reverence of someone receiving a thing they understand is important, even if they can't fully articulate why. She hung it above her bed that night. Nico said nothing about this, but Claire noticed he walked past Rosie's door twice the next morning, each time at an angle that allowed him to see the frame on the wall. Dante came home for dinner every night. Rosa, the housekeeper, 11 years with the family, communicator of truths through implication and meaningful pause, told Claire one morning over coffee, in a voice pitched like a woman dropping something valuable onto a table. He used to eat at his desk, every night. Cold food by himself, standing over papers. She said it, and then looked at her coffee mug, and said nothing else. She didn't need to. Claire and Dante talked most evenings after the boys were in bed. It started as debriefing, the practical handoff of a household day, who needed what, which teacher had called, whether Leo had finished his history project or merely claimed to have finished it. He had claimed. But it migrated, the way evening conversations do when two people are both tired enough to stop performing, into other territory. Hartford winters, his mother's cooking, the particular unfairness of being born into an identity you didn't choose and being held responsible for it anyway, the specific loneliness of parenthood when you're doing it without a partner, the loneliness not of being alone in a room, but of being the only adult in a room full of need, every decision landing on one set of shoulders with no one to turn to and say, "Is this right? Am I doing this right?" She understood that loneliness. It was the most familiar thing about him. One night he said, "You should have run." "You keep saying that," she said, "because it's true." "Running requires energy I don't have," she said, "and a place to run to." He was quiet for a moment. "You have one now. The bank account, the school district. You could take Rosie and go somewhere that isn't this." She looked at him across the kitchen island. The light was low, the hour was late, and he had the look he sometimes got at this time of night, stripped of the outer layer, just the man underneath, the one who ate cold food alone at his desk every night for years. "Is that what you want?" she asked. He took a long time answering. "No," he said, "which is why I said it." She understood that too, the thing you name out loud because you're afraid if you don't name it, it'll take you somewhere you're not ready to go. She went to bed that night without resolving anything. That was honest. That was where they were. It happened on a Wednesday. She came downstairs late, nearly midnight, for Rosie's retainer, which her daughter had left on the kitchen counter with the reliability of someone who would always leave her retainer on the kitchen counter. She was going to get it and go back up. That was the plan. Dante was in the upstairs hallway. She saw him from the top of the stairs before he heard her. He was standing in the open doorway of the boys' room, one hand braced lightly on the doorframe, looking in. The hallway light was off. The only illumination came from the faint nightlight inside the room, a small amber glow that fell across the 3 beds and the 3 sleeping forms with the particular gentleness that nightlight reserves for children. Leo was sprawled diagonally across his mattress, one arm flung over the side, entirely horizontal in his sleep, the way he was entirely lateral in his waking life, always moving sideways into whatever space existed, filling it. Ash was curled on his side, with a chessbook open, and fallen face down on the pillow beside him, as if he'd been mid-study, when sleep simply overruled him. Nico was on his back, hands at his sides, perfectly still, peaceful in the deep, settled way he was only ever peaceful when unconscious, the constant observational tension of his waking hours gone completely, his face younger without it, softer, just a boy. Dante stood and looked at them. Claire had seen many expressions on his face over the past 5 weeks, the controlled neutrality he wore for the world, the compressed, dangerous focus he carried when Vincent arrived, the hairline fracture-near smile he occasionally failed to suppress, the stripped-down, late-night honesty that emerged only in kitchens after midnight. She had not seen this. What was on his face now had no armor in it anywhere. It was grief and terror and something so large and unguarded it didn't have a clean name. The love a person carries for the things they know they could lose, have nearly lost, are always in the act of trying to protect. It was the face of a man who ran an empire with iron composure and came undone in a hallway by 3 sleeping children who had not asked to be born into the weight of his name. She stood very still. She should have gone back downstairs. She knew that. She knew it the way you know, mid-step onto ice, that the ground is unreliable. Clearly, immediately. Too late. She said his name. Dante. He turned. He saw her. And for 3 or 4 seconds, long enough to be irreversible, he stood with his face completely open, and she stood with hers, and the hallway held them both in the kind of silence that is not empty, but full, waited, the silence before something that cannot be taken back. He crossed the space between them. She did not step back. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized from the early weeks as the one he used when he was standing at the edge of something he wasn't sure was safe, the evaluating look, the threat assessment look, but directed at nothing threatening. Directed at her, at the specific and ordinary fact of her standing in the hallway in her socks at midnight, and whatever assessment he was making, it arrived at its conclusion, and he said her name. Claire, not Miss Beaumont. Not the professional distance of that title, which she had watched him use as a fence for 5 weeks. Her name, just her name, the 2 syllables of it, and she heard in his voice the sound of a man setting something down that had been very heavy for a very long time. I know, she said, which was not a logical response to her name being spoken. It was the only true one. He kissed her, and it was careful, tentative, almost questioning. And then it was not careful at all, because whatever had been accumulating in 5 weeks of late kitchens and shared silences and breakfast tables and the exact specific weight of being seen by someone who was paying real attention, all of that released at once. And when he pulled back, his forehead came to rest against hers, and they were both breathing differently than they had been, and the hallway was quiet, except for Leo turning over in his sleep, the soft thump of a restless boy finding a new position. This is complicated, Dante said, low, against her temple. Everything in my life is complicated, she said. I've stopped using that as a reason not to do things. He laughed. She felt it before she heard it. A real laugh, short and startled and warm, the kind that comes out of a person when they weren't braced for it, the kind of laugh that reveals the person underneath the performance. She loved that laugh. She noted this calmly in the part of herself that kept running tallies. She loved it. Stay, he said. Then, with the precision of a man who does not use words imprecisely, not as the nanny, stay. She pulled back enough to look at him properly. His face was still open. He let it be. My daughter comes with me, she said. All of her. Mr. Hops and the chess lessons and Gerald the Frog and all of it? Obviously, he said, and meant it. And I'm not a kept woman, she said. I work. I have opinions. I will tell you when I think you're wrong, and I think you're wrong more often than you're used to hearing. I know, he said. And there it was. Her own words returned to her, the same 2 syllables, the same simplicity. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Down the hallway, in the amber glow of the nightlight, Nico shifted in his sleep. His arm moved, out from his side, open-palmed, upward, the involuntary gesture of someone dreaming of reaching for something. Then he settled again. Still, peaceful. Just a boy. Claire and Dante stood in the hallway a moment longer, foreheads touching, the weight of the house around them, the sleeping children, the long driveway, the iron gate, the whole complicated, armored, imperfect life of this place. And then she pulled back and looked at him and said, The boys still need breakfast in the morning. Yes, he said, they do. She went downstairs. She got Rosie's retainer from the kitchen counter. She came back up. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the house breathe around her. The small sounds of a large building at rest, the distant tick of the heating system, the faint sound of wind at the garden side windows. And she thought about $11. 43 in a Dunkin' Donuts on Maple Street, and a Craigslist ad that had looked wrong from the first word, and a water balloon she'd caught by reflex, and a sketchbook full of women standing in doorways with their backs turned, and a tired man eating French toast in a charcoal suit, and 3 boys in pajamas who had demolished 22 professionals and been undone by a waitress from Hartford who didn't have the energy to run. She thought about all of it. She slept better than she had in years. In the morning, she got up at 5:45. She went downstairs. She made breakfast. All 5 of them came to the table. This is the story of what happens when 2 broken people stop running from the thing that could save them. And a woman too desperate to be afraid turned out to be exactly fearless enough to matter. Claire didn't walk into that iron gate with a plan. She walked in with nothing, and somehow nothing was precisely the right thing to bring. If this story hit you somewhere real, if you've ever been the person with $11 and a reason to stay, drop a comment and tell us. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the desperate choice is sometimes the bravest one. Hit like, hit subscribe, because we're just getting started and the next story is even wilder. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? The gate's open.